พิ่นได้เขียนว่าเพื่อสร้างจิตใจรักษานั้นเพิ่นได้เรียกร้องให้คนเฮาต้องจื้อจำพร้อมๆกันก็ให้หลงลืมข้าพเจ้าจะต้องเฮ็ดให้ตัวเองตกอยู่ในสภาพอันตรายให้อันตรายซ้ำกับตูบน้อยสีฟ้าตั้งอยู่ตะลิ่งแม่น้ำของเพิ่นได้บอกเฮาว่าพวกเพิ่นได้พากันย้านบ่น้อยในเวลาย่างเข้าไปในผีปราสาทเพื่อถ่ายรูปเงาเพราะเพิ่นย้านว่าสุมวิญญาณจะบ่เข้าใจเจตนาของพวกเพิ่นเห็นจำเป็นที่ต้องอธิบายให้วิญญาณทราบถึงจุดประสงค์ของการเยี่ยมยามนั้นเพื่อรับประกันว่าพวกวิญญาณจะบ่นำหล่อหลอนรบกวนไปทางบ้านเฮือนเพิ่นได้เขียนว่าสังคมมนุษย์บ่สามารถรับสภาพที่บ่แน่นอนจริงจังนี้ได้คนลาวเว้าว่าเพื่อสร้างอันใดอันหนึ่งเฮาจะต้องสูญเสียสิ่งหนึ่งไปนางได้อ่านว่าอาจารย์ได้ถูกจับย้อนเพิ่นได้เว้าเรื่องวิญญาณเทวดาและพระเจ้าและย้อนมีคนซากันว่าเพิ่นบินได้นางได้อ่านว่าเมื่อเพิ่นถูกบังคับให้ซิกห้องสมุดของเพิ่นถูกยึดแต่2 ปีต่อมาเพิ่นซ้ำถูกเชิญให้กลับสู่ชีวิตสังฆานักบวชแต่เพิ่นซ้ำปฏิเสธและทุกวันนี้เพิ่นจำศีลห่มขาว
Wow. She imagined the flight paths of all the birds in the world, a web of 100 billion filaments. She thought of the hummingbird that can hover almost indefinitely, only rarely touching the earth, visiting 1,000 flowers a day for nectar, and remembering every one of them. And of the bird known only as B95 for the tag on its leg, that had flown more miles than separate the earth and the moon. Talk to me of distance and closeness. Birds have 2 voice boxes. They can sing duets with themselves. When 2 things are parallel, they exist side by side and relate to each other across a gap. They don't have to meet to know one another. There's something between them. Can you describe the sound of the bombs, Uncle? Words don't contain everything, you know. The word bomb is not the same as feeling a bomb detonate. I feel, therefore I think, therefore I am, she thought. She read that at the bomb point, right where it detonates, is silence. You can hear nothing. It's just sonic energy, inaudible, but it deafens you. It only becomes noise much further out at the fringes of the blast. Deafening silence. She remembered his words. Let the world be without name for a time. Let things listen to what they are, in silence, in their own time, and their own way.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on a Sunday afternoon. Today's discussion marks the launch of the latest Outbound commission, Eidolon, by the artist duo Vong Phaophanit and Claire Oboussier. This new Outbound commission is located in the City Hall Courtyard, and my name is Z, the curator of the project, and I'll be your host and the moderator of this afternoon. So what you saw earlier were 2 excerpts from 2 films by Vong and Claire. The titles of the films, All That Is Solid Melts Into Air, Karl Marx, and Never Real Historians, Always Near Poets. The complete films are currently screening at our UOB Theatre over this long weekend until next Monday. This is a special feature to coincide with the launch of the new commission, so I urge you all to try and catch them this evening, perhaps after the talk. Never Real Historians, Always Near Poets, the second film which you watch, the excerpt, where you see it on a sort of ultra panoramic view, first premiered at the 6th edition of the Singapore Biennial that was led by Patrick Flores. The film was also exhibited at the National Gallery Singapore, and it was around this time in 2018, 2019, that I first met Vong and Claire. The two films excerpt are shared here to show the vast and well-rounded practice of Vong and Claire. And the films, while made about 14 years apart, point towards a practice of a collective continuity and how themes that speak towards a practice of developing over time and across time, and how in turn time speaks to Vong and Claire's practice. Persistent across these decades is an unyielding commitment by Vong and Claire towards the relationship between seeing and looking, something which they will delve in a little more in depth in their sharing after this. We're really excited to have Vong and Claire with us today, but we are also really excited to have architect and urbanist Marco Kusumawijaya from Indonesia to join us to give a response of the work, which he had also just viewed just yesterday when he arrived. So let me begin by just sharing how the session will be sort of laid out today. We have 3 segments, and I hope you're patient across all 3 segments. In the first, we'll have Vong and Claire share about their practice, but also dive more in-depthly in the themes that looks at Eidolon, the deeper poetic resonances with the space as well, both as a blank canvas for their commission, as well as one of the key museum entrances, which used to be an open courtyard of the municipal building that was built in 1929. So all of its present and past histories collapsing into this particular work. In the second segment, Marco will share a response tying in his own reflection of the work with his abiding research and interest in the histories of urban spaces, architecture, and also regional histories. And in the last segment, we'll all be here together for a discussion, but I hope by then you'll be quite engaged with all the wealth of content to ask us questions and also share some of your responses. Now, allow me to introduce the artists and our speakers today. Vong Phaophanit and Claire Oboussier have been working together for more than 30 years. Their practice, as you also got a glimpse from the 2 excerpts of the films, encompasses across film, photography, drawing, public commissions that include installations and sculptural works, all of which explore the concept of language, memory, deteriorization, as well as forms of meaning-making that often exceed national as well as cultural borders. I'll share a little bit more what you did not read from the bio. Vong Phaophanit was born in Savannakhet in 1961, and following the political events in Laos, he moved to Paris where he was educated. That was where he met Claire. After they got married, they moved to the UK in 1985. Vong was nominated for the Turner Prize in 1993. In the same year, the year later, he was awarded a DAAD fellowship in Berlin. Claire Oboussier is born in 1963, where she studied French in the School of African and Asian Studies at the University of Sussex, graduating in 1986. In 1991, Claire was awarded the Diamond and Thomas Scholarship for Doctoral Research in the Art and Humanities at the University of Bristol, where she taught French feminist literature and theory, as well as where she set up and ran the interdisciplinary critical theory seminar for faculty. More recently, Vong and Claire have presented commissioned works for the Thailand Biennale in 2018, the Singapore Biennale in 2019, as well as a major permanent video installation, The Call of Things, in the City of London. Their work is held in the collection globally, including various institutions such as Tate and the Singapore Art Museum. I would now like to introduce Marco Kusumawijaya. As I mentioned earlier, an architect and urbanist who has worked across the fields of social housing, urban studies, and art through design, research, writing, and citizen activism. He was the chair of the Jakarta Art Council between 2006 and 2010, as well as the founding director of the Rujak Center for Urban Studies in 2010 to 2017. He was also the head of Coastal Committee in Jakarta Governor Delivery Unit from 2017 to 2019, as well as the member of Jakarta Academy from 2022 to 2024. Marco completed various fellowships and residencies globally and has also received awards, including the Dubai International Award for Best Performance in Improving Human Settlements in 2028. More recently, he published a 3-volume book titled Kota-Kota Indonesia Pengantar untuk Orang Banyak, or Indonesian Towns, Introduction for Everyone, which was completed in 2023. It was, upon reading and perusing the 3-volume book that I thought Marco would be a suitable and adequate sort of respondent to this talk today, given the fact that Eidolon itself is not only a work that is imposed by the artist within the courtyard space, but rather what I see as a placeholder, an artwork that is able to hold space for various different interpretation and also histories. Without further ado now, may I please welcome Vong and Claire to the stage for their sharing.
Hi, can you hear us? Thank you all for coming. It's great to see you all. We're going to start by actually showing you quite a limited selection of works. We decided to not do that thing where you try and survey a 35-year-old practice, because that's just too much and it becomes rather tedious. So what we've done is we've looked through and taken out a number of, I think, lesser well-known works that we want to just show you in order to kind of spark ideas and discussions and introduce Eidolon, that is the commission that Z has been talking about in the City Hall Courtyard. So, do you have the clicker? Well, okay, so this piece is called Pipe Dream. And the reason we selected it actually is because of its kind of architectural resonance. We were asked by some architects in London called Wilkinson Eyre, who are a very interesting practice, to produce a piece of work that sort of knitted together a building. And it reminded us a little bit of NGS, actually, because it's an existing Victorian school that had been redesigned and wrapped around with a modern scheme in order to create an educational, a college that served, I think, something like a community with 52 different languages, a very, very diverse North London community. And the idea was to produce something that was able to go through the building and create a sense of cohesion, if you like, to bring together the new and the old, and to try and give a sense of the energy that was circulating around the building. So, Vong, if you want to kind of describe.
It's also, it was also divided in 3 different sections, the building. One which is the main reception, which is the public space. And then as you go further inside, you then, the second place was mainly for students and all the staff that use the building. And then the third place was more private. And the first image that you see here is the work in the first section. And as you move in, the lines, the blue lines, change colors and turn into red, somehow signifying a change of the space. And this is the third space. So the 6 or 7 lines.
Yeah, it's made from neon, as you can see, that changes hue as you move through the building. And this third space, you can see the trace of the original Victorian staircase that they've removed, but we asked the architect if we could keep the original tiles. So you've got this kind of layering up the wall, and our piece moves up through those different stories and kind of disappears through the roof of the building. It's as if the kind of energy of the space is just moving up and dispersing into the outside world. This next piece is a piece from 2015 called "It Is As If," and it was commissioned by the Wellcome Trust, who are interested in helping artists produce work that intersects and dialogues with biomedical research. So what we did is we'd wanted for a long time to try and collaborate with a surgeon and look at the language of the hands of a surgeon. So we managed to find someone called Professor Kneebone, believe it or not, who was professor of surgery at Imperial College London. And we put it to him, would he like to collaborate with us? And he accepted. And so what we asked him to do was to, just by memory, reenact with his hands a surgical intervention that he had made. And we let him choose himself. We didn't give him any direction. He chose the piece of surgery that he could remember. And we shot it in one shot. I think it took 40-something minutes with just one camera shot. And he actually chose an operation that he had conducted in apartheid South Africa many years previously, probably 30 years ago before that. And it turned out that it was actually a really quite frightening. He was a young surgeon. It was an emergency intervention for a young man who had been stabbed. So that was his own, choice, and it obviously gave a very grave kind of resonance to the piece. And he did that, and when you listen, you won't be able to hear it because these are still images, but you can hear him muttering and reminding himself. So the whole piece is presented in this underground chamber in South London, and we constructed, you can see, a kind of labyrinth of timber that the viewer had to move through in order to find the film of the surgeon. And the film itself was flanked with 2 other video pieces, one that was shot in Laos, and one that was of the Thames and the Mekong kind of woven together. It's quite a complex piece, so it's difficult to show, in this way. But that was 2015. It is as if, I don't know, Vong, if you want to say anything about it.
Well, during the filming, he turned up with a colleague of him, and at the end of the shooting, I had a brief chat with his colleague, and she told me that she could follow each gesture he was creating or reenacting, and she totally understood precisely at what point he was doing removing things or cutting things or stitching. And the full performance was the full length of that operation, and that's why we kept it completely uncut. So the images from Laos was mainly shot in the south part of Laos, in an old town called Champasak. There was a lot of empty building. This refer back to people leaving the country in the mid-70s, and some have remained that way up until now, and the other has been taken up by local residents or people coming from the countryside. This is the shots of the two rivers merging into a.
So bay windows, yes. This was a temporary project that we did in the UK for a very sort of rundown seaside town on the east coast called Herne Bay, which is quite near Whitstable, some of you may know. And if you know the UK, you'll know that a lot of the previously really magnificent kind of seaside destinations have become, really run down and quite poor. And this was an initiative to inject some kind of engagement and energy into the town at that time. So what we decided to do was to engage with local people and simply ask them one question: what is your dream destination? If you could choose anywhere in the world or anything, it doesn't even have to be a place, it can be an imaginary thing. Just give us one word. And we asked them to scrawl it on a piece of paper, a postcard. There were, around the town, there were postcards left in libraries and schools and various locations. And people were invited to do this. So we had their handwriting and their dream destination. And then after that, we sifted through them and kind of figured out which ones would resonate the most strongly within the context of Herne Bay. And we had them scaled up in exactly the handwriting of the individual, and then sort of hidden around the town, sometimes actually in domestic windows of people's. One young guy had one in his bedroom and it said Tokyo, in his handwriting. And then we had some in more prominent locations like the railway station and along the promenade and so on. So it was there, I think it was for 3 months it was there, and people were invited to kind of wander around and find these dreams, So that was Herne Bay. And I think the next piece we're going to show you...
Herne Bay, sorry, I just want to add something. Herne Bay, at one point in history, used to be a dream destination.
Yeah.
For people to escape from London for the weekend.
Yeah.
Until the late 60s, beginning of 70s, when all that mass tourism took place somewhere else, like in Spain, and it took away all that business. And since then, Herne Bay have known a slow decline, economically speaking. And for us, when we start asking the local residents, the fact that you are living in a dream destination, do you still have another dream of the dream destination? And that's how it all took place.
That's along the promenade where we chose to place Fiji, for example. And USA we put in a derelict shop. And we also, this is quite a while ago, 2008, but we also decided to put a flicker on USA, which you can't see there. So it was because the handwriting was very sort of feeble, we felt. And adding a flicker made it even more feeble. And it was quite interesting just to see, you usually see USA in such kind of robust terms everywhere, very prominent. So it was kind of a way of sort of, if you like, attenuating its power a little bit and sort of placing it somewhere where it had a rather different kind of, a different kind of way of speaking and sense of its own identity. So we had a bit of fun with that, really. This is Interlaken, which is an Austrian ski resort, and that's put along the seafront with the waves crashing in. And that is, a close-up of Interlaken. Another derelict shop. So you can see a lot of the town was really run down. A lot of the buildings were empty and so on. So this next one, I think, is actually what we call a sister work to the one you've just seen, in a completely different context, much more urban context in Birmingham, central Birmingham. And it took place, Vong, in the old station, yeah? Mm-hmm. I think you said it used to be the busiest station in Europe.
It's round, where trains come in, and there's a circle platform that turn around so that they redirect the train on different route. It's one of the oldest in England.
So obviously the population in Birmingham is very different than in a small seaside town. So it's a much more diverse kind of population, one that's actually changes a lot because you have, people coming and going and a student population and migrant workers and so on. So, and at that time there was also a lot of homelessness. So there were people sleeping outside and, so we tried to engage with a cross-section of people. And I think you can see that through the words that were collected, because you have really a lot of different languages and scripts. You've got Polish, you've got Chinese, you've got all sorts of different, that says Zion. So we instead of putting them around the cityscape, we put them inside the station building that was disused. And that's how they were displayed, and people could just wander around and kind of engage with them in that way. Again, a temporary work. It was up for about 2 or 3 months, I think, this piece. Right. I think we have to speed up, Rose, don't we? In other words, this is just because we want to show the other side of our practice, which is producing commissioned work often with architects. And this was made for Cambridge University more recently in 2018, I think. And the concept was this is Cambridge University, what they call Cambridge assessments. It deals with all the exams throughout Cambridge, but also it serves a global kind of cohort of universities and schools. So if you pick up your paper, you'll see Cambridge University, it's a kind of exam system. And it's also the Cambridge University Press, so it produces all the press for the university as well. So we decided to delve into the archives and pull out lots and lots and lots and lots of exam papers in different languages and make them into a big mass and layer them. So you get this kind of palimpsest of scripts, different scripts, layers and layers and layers of historic kind of knowledge building. I don't know if you want to say something, Vong, about Cambridge.
Well, it's the amalgam of languages. And I think what we wanted to do is also to create a sound by looking at the actual print on the glass, the sound of the language, the spoken language. So it's a quiet piece, but at the same time, it's noisy on another level.
And it's in two locations, at the front of the building and on a tower that's lit up at night. So as you can probably see, I think have we run out of time, Rose? No, we're okay. So that's from the interior of the space, and that's the tower. Do we go to speak to Eidolon now? Yeah, okay. So now the most important part, yeah. So, go ahead.
Eidolon. I mean, we first came across the space when we were showing the film at the Biennale in 2018, 2019. And what really impressed me the most was the white walls when you enter that. And this is something that, a discussion that I had with Z the other day regarding the canvas, the blank canvas, and how white is the canvas. So that's how it all started. The question of, how neutral is that white? What is the history of that white? How it became white before? What was there before the color white?
Yeah.
And we started with lots of ideas, but at the same time, we didn't know where we were going. We knew what we didn't want to do. And that's how Eidolon came, came to do.
We felt it was kind of paradoxical. This was a vast space, and we needed to do something that engaged properly with its scale. It's not a question of like just bringing an object in and putting it on the floor and, a kind of pre-made thing plonked in the middle. We knew we couldn't do that. Equally, we didn't want to do something that just read like a mobile, sort of suspended in the center of the space, because that's not what we do. So we needed to kind of respond to the scale with something that really held that scale itself, but also not something that was too kind of heavy with meaning, heavy with presence. It needed to be both significant in scale, but also very, very light of touch. And that was the real challenge, I think. And I have to say right now that the team, and without Yingzi and Z and all of the team, actually helping to make sure that the piece could be properly installed, it never would have. It would have been much too challenging. So it really was a team effort. So with our work, we never want our work to be like a message. It's not like a pre-existing idea or message that the viewer comes along and kind of goes, I get that. I've deciphered the message. I've understood it. It's more like a catalyst for a production of meaning, something that helps meaning be unlocked and circulated, new meaning, new ideas. So not pre-existing ideas. And again, Eidolon, so in that sense, Eidolon is a kind of just a blank veil. It sort of says nothing, but in saying nothing, it's capable of releasing new energy and new meaning. And I think that's probably the sort of ethos behind it.
Yes, I wasn't very confident proposing the ideas to the panel because tried to convince a panel to adopt an artwork that won't be most of the time not visible in a space such as the courtyard, which is quite big.
Yeah.
How can we convince them? Through drawings, through
Conversations.
conversation, and it was a very, a pleasant surprise that the National Gallery took up that challenge.
Yeah.
And we also realized how complex the fabrication and the installation process will also impose, to all of us. And all this complexity is based on a very simple ideas. One line across the diagonally across the space, and that line is made up of something very basic, a bearded chain that people use or touch every day, morning and evening, just to roll and unroll the blind, and each bead, the fact that we opted for a specific finish, represent a reflection of that space, like a mirror. And all this, of course, in that space, is so far away from, from the actual beat. You only read it as something very, how do you say, very fragile and very light. So this is another, for example, another way of expressing the idea. But throughout the entire project, it was about, how much we want to remove and how much we want to add.
We actually started off experimenting with, instead of the beads, with white silk thread, which in a gallery space could be really successful, I think. But we quickly realized that it just wasn't the right scale, and it wasn't going to do what we needed to do. So it took us a while to come across the beaded link chain. And I wasn't convinced by it initially. But then I realized that actually using something that really is quite prosaic and quite basic, that is not sort of loaded with, it's quite universal language, because we all, as Vong said, we all sort of handle it every day to either conceal or reveal our space, and to open up to the outside world or to close away from the outside world. So it's very familiar, but it's actually very banal. It's a very mundane material. And in the end, I think we really liked that, because introducing something much more coded and connoted like silk was going to add perhaps too much meaning to the work at the outset. We needed something much kind of quieter. So that's why we settled on this in the end, I think, really. And these just show you a few of the renders that we produced with Savan in the studio to try and convey the idea. And as Vong was saying, it was quite difficult to convey the idea of something that is trying to be not there and there at the same time. How do you actually, get people to invest in that and believe in it? So, yeah.
You can see we slightly cheated. We make it very dark there.
Yeah, we wanted it to have this double edge to it. It's kind of like an invisible boundary, a permeable border, something that is both porous and present at the same time, and it's always vacillating between those two states. So that was the kind of what we wanted to create. It was just finding the right language, finding the right density of the beads, studying the spacing, moving around to see, how the eye responded to to the lengths of chain and how wide they were apart. We conducted some tests here in October in order to kind of understand that better. And in the end, I think it's about, talking to Marco this morning, it's about sort of being in possession of the space, but not taking possession of the space somehow on that border, and creating a language that is able to be poetic and critical at the same time, while saying nothing at all. So it's a strange kind of set of needs. I think it's going to be Marco's turn too. Yeah, I think that's probably it for now for Eidolon. We're going to discuss it later once you've had a turn to.
Yeah, thank you so much, Vong and Claire, for walking us through not the full 35 years of the collaborative collective practice, but really sort of key points and key moments, and how the two of you work together in thinking about or reading a space before proposing a work. We'll get to some of that later in the discussion, but I would like to now invite Marco to give his response of the work. And please, Marco.
Thank you. See, first of all, I want to congratulate Singapore and, of course, the National Gallery for having this work here and having Claire and Vong. I had been with Vong and Claire for the last more than 24 hours, right? We were staying in the same hotel. We had dinner and we had breakfast this morning. But believe me, I haven't heard something that they just said, which actually stimulated me more about the possible comments that I could make. But I prepare some notes, but it would be silly to read them. I don't want to give a speech, so it will be kind of spontaneous with a few ideas. The first idea is that Claire mentioned the possession of the space. I said earlier that I congratulate Vong and Claire actually because I said their work has succeeded in possessing the space, but Claire reminded me that possession has some negative sense in it in the English language, but in the Malay word, we would use the word kerasukan, merasuki. You possess, but not overcome the space, and I think I like it there. The tension between appearance and disappearance, which is the very essence of Eidolon. But the thing is that when I said it's the work kind of possess the space, I think now we have to see the whole space as the work of Claire and Vong. It's not the strings of beads anymore. It's the whole space, because the string of beads have transformed the overall space into haunting work. But she mentioned my book, which is very long, 1,700 pages. And the point is, yes, after writing such long, thick books, it's very difficult to see things not through that lens of the book. So my lens is to see this as a reminder of the idea of garden in Asian cultures. And so I think there's a quote from Denis Lombard. Denis Lombard is a French historian, expert on Asian cultures, and he wrote with the audience in mind, the French countrymen, that he said, mind you that the Asian garden is not like our garden, which is pleasing the eyes, but Asian gardens are supposed to facilitate meditation. So the aesthetics, yes, but the aesthetics is oriented toward a very spiritual, very ethical goal, which is meditation. Yes, you have beautiful tree, you have beautiful flowers, but that is not for the purpose of entertainment, but for the purpose of enlightenment. So in that sense, I think Eidolon has transformed the space again into a modern Asian garden, which is for meditation. You reflect when you get there. I think you might have seen the work, and if you go back now, you have to in Claire work you have to look very hard to be able to see the different possible layers behind it, and then you reflect. And on this reflection, I think I find this work also is a ghost within a ghost, because I feel that the building, I know someone said the building is actually haunted, but actually, if you think about this colonial building, colonialism is a ghost. And it is not just this building. If you look further out, you look to the Padang with a very long historical background, and you look into the Strait of Singapore, and you look into the Strait of Malacca, and you look into the region of Southeast Asia, the region of the archipelago, the Malay archipelago. There are ghosts everywhere. And I think the city is actually a place for ghosts, because the city really kind of holds the past, the present, and the future together. And on this note on the future, it is very important to think of the ghost, not only of the past, but also of the future. I think in our modern time, we are haunted more by the future than by the past. We tend to forget the past, and we tend to over-obsessed with the future. I mean, isn't it the question today is, wow, what is Donald Trump going to do tomorrow? Wow, what or where will I do my holiday the next holiday season? Or how much my investment will yield next month, with the going up and down of the stock market. So we are haunted by the future. And I think this has to do with our treatment of modernity, that we like to, I think there is a quote from your film, we are always asked to forget and to remember at the same time. Because when we remember something, it also means actually we are forgetting something. And when we are forgetting something, we automatically also remembering something else. And I think this selection of what to remember and what to forget is a major haunting challenge in our modern life, because modern life means a lot of changes, a lot of new things all the time. On this note, I just noticed that there is a rather official Singapore history book now that acknowledges the 700 years of Singapore history beyond Raffles, But the thing is, when you start going further to the past, 700 years meaning when Singapore was supposed to be called Singapore, Singapura, by Sri Nila Utama, then you immediately also have to remember that before it is called Singapura, it is called Temasek. So there is something before Singapura. So it's never enough to go into the past or the future. It's keep you going. And I think it is good. Don't stop, right? Because the problem is when we fear where to stop. And I don't think we have to fear where to stop. We just go on and go on. And I think it is good that when you expand your history, you also dealing with new ghosts or things that you can claim more. So with respect to the garden, for example, Singapore now, by acknowledging that it is actually founded by a prince of Sriwijaya, Singapore now can claim the park tradition of Sriwijaya. which in my study is the first known public park of the which is officiated or inaugurated by the king, the founder king of Sriwijaya, on the 24th March of 684, our common era. It's not 1684; it's 684, which is well documented in an inscription, the Talang Tuwo. It's a park because it says that this park I meaning the king, I dedicated this park to those who are passing or who are, staying to get free food and drink. So it has at the same time a spiritual and an ethical goal, and then it mentioned like 25 or 30 species of plants, and that there are water, and there are, a pond, etc. So the point is, by expanding your history, you have more to claim, you have more ghosts to remember and to deal with courageously. I think that's beautiful. When you see more ghosts. For example, if you read Orhan Pamuk, Istanbul, and after reading it, you go around Istanbul, I'm sure you will see ghosts everywhere. And I hope that after looking at Vong's and Claire's work, you will go out to the city of Singapore and see more ghosts. And I like it because I do have this silly bias that every time I come to Singapore, I feel this is a city without ghosts. Because there is a public kind of a perception that with modernity, with modernization, with new buildings, new parks, a lot of lights, there are no more ghosts. There is no more memory, if I may use the ghost as a metaphor for memories. And then I think there is also a very nice quote from a Japanese writer, a modernist, name is Junichiro Tanasaki. Are you familiar? He wrote beautiful essay in 1920s, I think, called In Praise of Shadows. And already at the time, he criticized Tokyo of having too much lit. And I think Singapore is almost going to that direction, but at the same time, I think it is good now you're going back to 700 years of history, where you are bringing back ghosts, bringing back darkness, bringing back more memories. And I think we have to thank Vong and Claire for reminding us, for bringing back ghosts into the city. I have 4 minutes left. I think I would like to say something about the colonial ghost. I mentioned earlier how I think also in your film you mentioned about how the propaganda about national essentialism kind of limited our perception of our identity, our being, our existence.
Exactly.
I think when you say you have 700 years of history, the evidence is very clear, just very near us, north of us. No, where is north? Is it there? The Fort Canning Hill. Fort Canning Hill actually has been an important archaeological site where they discovered, among other things, strings of beads from 14th century or 13th century. Yeah, and it's here is a description. Yes, so it is. The archaeologists thought it was from glass, similar to those found in Sumatra, etc. But so you now have ghosts going beyond or from beyond the colonial time. But even during the colonial time, there are much more to remember. For example, instead of Raffles, you could also remember John Crawford. You know Crawford Road or Crawford Street or Crawford Lane and Crawford Bridge in Singapore, right? But actually it was written with an O, right? Crawford. Actually, the right spelling is Crawford with an U. He was the second resident of Singapore after Raffles. And he actually concluded the so-called Crawford Treaty of 1824, which ceded permanently Singapore from the Johor Sultanate to the East Indian Company. And he actually laid out the fundamentals of or for the Singapore economic development. So we normally, do not remember him as well as we remember Raffles. While for me, I think his role for Singapore economic development is very much comparable to Goh Keng-Siu. Are you familiar with Goh Keng-Siu? Goh Keng-Siu is your kind of first minister of economic development, your first minister of education, your first minister of defense. So he really laid out the basic defense system for Singapore, education system for Singapore, and the economic development foundation for Singapore. And we, of course, do not remember him as well as we remember the great Lee Kuan Yew. So I think there is a parallel between John Crawford and Goh Keng-Siu being a ghost that are overshadowed by bigger ghosts. I think I end there, and let's have conversation about ghosts, about colonialism, about history, and about garden, about park, the meaning of park. I think it is very important to remember that a garden in many of our tradition, in Asian at least, I don't know in outside, but a garden is supposed to be not for entertainment, but for enlightenment. If there is some entertainment in it, beautiful flowers, delicious fruit, they are beautiful, but they are only means towards enlightenment rather than remaining as entertainment. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marco, for that really sort of compelling and engaging sharing and response towards Eidolon. I think one thing that I picked up from both your sharing was this two ideas. One, an occupation, but two, a transformation. And so in the first sharing by Vong and Claire, I couldn't help but to see that a lot of the projects that are highlighted, but also like the ethos of your practice is occupying a site upon invitation, sometimes almost parasitically, like a parasite as a phantom or even an annotation. So it's never really sort of overpowering, but highlighting and, bringing back a sort of memory that was no longer present. So drawing out what, has been lingering. And yet, when Marco gave his response, and I know I've seen some of your images from your slide, but this is my first time hearing your response, is this fact that there is also another reading that perhaps Eidolon is a transformation of that space, that it's not only just occupying that space, but it's transforming it. So in, its presence, it is not actually directing our attention or focus to the work, but creating a space from which it could be thought through, not as a key circulation space, but as in Marco's words, a garden for contemplation and meditation, I suppose, right? So I want to maybe start off from there before returning to the scarier things like ghosts that are haunting us, in our psyche, but also in our history. I want to return to the artwork first. And I wanted to say that much like the kind of tension of encountering ghosts, perhaps is the experience of a sort of restless unease in the face of emptiness. And so as artists, often when you're invited to create a work in a space and it's huge, there must be a lot of that restless unease or that tension. And I wanted to sort of maybe draw from this interview or conversation Vong, you had with Guy Brett in 2001 after your residency at the Center for Drawing in the Wimbledon School of Art, where you said that the drawing all have a common starting point and they are all results of an experience of the unconscious within this given space, the empty page. And so one must think of the courtyard as similar to an empty page or a blank canvas, which was what I started the session with. And I'm sort of curious to how you both started to conceive this image or the idea when you were first invited to submit a proposal for evaluation. Could you maybe just share a bit about what was the experience of the unconscious in the City Hall?
I mean, I think that's a really key question, not just in relation to Eidolon, but also our whole practice, really. And it goes back to this idea of, as artists, and this is something that is very important for me, particularly because I come from an academic background, is to understand that muscle that is to do with the image, not the text. And I know we work a lot with language, but we work with language in a poetic way, almost language as image. And I think with our practice, the image always comes first. And then language and meaning sort of drifts towards it and adheres to it. And then you have this kind of creation of meaning and sense. And I'm sure that goes back to what Vong was talking about to Guy Brett all those years ago, is that it's something very important to us. We don't start off with an idea. We always start up with an image, and it does come. And then sometimes you will discard that image and you'll say, no, that's not the right image. That's not quite doing what we wanted to do. And so another image will come, and eventually it will be the right image. But that is actually how it works for us. And we always ultimately agree on the image, so which is quite surprising.
But it's also to do quite a lot with intuition. And as I said earlier, we don't know what we're going to do, but it's like a blind person touching and feeling. And for Eidolon, at the beginning, we were talking about addition, subtraction. We're talking about how to create a grain of sand in the well-oiled mechanism, because the building itself dictates the way you look at it. It's so, the rectangle, the line, the horizon, it's the perspective is very classical in that sense. And we wanted to play the same thing, but by changing slightly the angle. That's how the diagonal came to surface. And so sometimes we just move the position by a few degrees, just to shaken the foundation, in order to start a discussion, a conversation about the place. So it's about also how quiet our intervention could be, without being too heavy, without being too lousy, without being too flashy. And that's how the work became, what it is now. Yeah.
Perhaps it's a good moment to talk about looking and seeing again. That comes up all the time, and something we've talked about for many, many years. It's an idea that comes from the French writer Merleau-Ponty, who notes a difference between the act of looking and the act of seeing. Looking being something that is very kind of culturally bound. It's to do with a kind of build-up of knowledge and education and cultural sort of baggage that we carry around with us. And therefore, you know, in the film we say, when you look at something, you already know what it is that you are seeing because you've got all that knowledge. And whereas he kind of advocates for seeing, which is a kind of liberated use of the body and eyes, and it's actually more of a physical act, something perhaps a bit more akin to touch. It's like a meeting of the seen and the seer. It's a sort of a physical thing. And I suppose what we try to do when we create new work or create new images is to create them in the realm of seeing rather than looking. So we're not trying to impart a kind of didactic message or say something very specific, but we're trying to create an image or an environment that could open up that possibility for seeing rather than looking.
I think this relationship of seeing and looking is really interesting, and perhaps like it also shifts in ways, because you know these two words are so commonly used, but we don't think about what they actually mean perhaps, or the distinctive differences between that. But before I move on to the next question, in terms of the seeing and looking, I want to kind of seize the opportunity to just check if everyone here today in this room, has had an opportunity to see the work. Just quick. Yeah, so that's good, because it's a lot of what is discussed here about the drawing that line. It's almost like, in many ways, I often joke with Vong and Claire that it's like having a page slice straight into the courtyard. And yet, we've spent the last 7 nights installing the work, segment by segment by segment. And every morning when we start again, we try to look at the work. And the one thing that we've been trying to do very hard is to photograph that work. And it is such a difficult enterprise, It
is.
Exactly. So there is that return to this ghost and the phantom and the seeing and trying very hard to perhaps look, right? And I think the fact of the matter is that the installation being just this double, like a 2-sided row of beads, wherever you are within the courtyard, whether you're on ground level or whether you're on one of the levels along the balconies, right, along the parapets looking into the courtyard, is the fact that the lines shifts and they change according to your position. So very much like this ghost, it's almost like seeing something in your peripheral vision, and when you turn to look, you catch nothing. So much like a ghost, except that perhaps with the artwork, you kind of want to see it. With a ghost, I suppose you don't want to encounter the actual apparition. So this goes back to this idea of the ghost, this metaphor for memory in Marco's response. But really, actually, ghosts are quite scary. I mean, I speak from personal experience, and I think I speak on behalf of everyone. I don't think we are people who are very excited or look forward to seeing ghosts. But in many ways, what has been shared today is that we are trying to perhaps introduce the idea of a haunting, where Eidolon, the word, comes from, a phantom, is that the haunting is instead a way of maybe thinking of the forgotten history, so a way of remembering or unforgetting, but also a way of imagining a future. So actually, I want to pose this question to Marco, but after which I would like to invite some responses from the floor. Like, how do you perhaps hope the visitors might see or think of this piece when they encounter the work? Because, I know that Vong and Claire, also quoting from the same conversation with Guy Brett, is that there is a commitment in the practice, whether it's drawing or, an installation or a sculpture, that it's always about creating a new way of seeing and of thinking when you encounter the work. So how might you perhaps hope we see or think when we look at the work?
I think very obviously the works require us to spend some efforts to really appreciate it. It's not something that a painting with strong colors that you can immediately feel the impact even without trying. So I think that's what I meant when I said you really have to look hard to see things beyond the layers of illusions. And also by this I mean the whole city, because city always holds different layers of meaning, different layers of history, different layers of reality experienced by different people. So I think the work introduced very important element of effort. It requires effort. I think this has been missing in many popular culture, where your senses are immediately stimulated without you even spending a drop of effort, right? You are passive. That's what happened. I think research have shown when you are looking too much on screen, the screens does not stimulate you. It imposes things on you. You are not thinking together with it. That's the different things with reading. When you read, you are given opportunities to imagine, to converse with the text rather than with the images on the screen. So I think that
We've added another layer. So instead of maybe seeing or looking at Eidolon, that we are reading the work
Yes.
as well.
Yeah, and when you think about ghosts as memories, it is not true that we are always afraid to look at ghosts. No, actually, there are many kind of perceptions about phantoms or spirits. In a more general sense, spirits are not always bad, right? Sometimes they are good, sometimes, and some. I think in some culture, when people are encountered with spirits, that could be seen as a sign for the future or some reminder of something. But of course, if you talk about the Greek Eidolon, of course, they always appear in tragedy, not in comedy. Isn't it? Because Eidolon is defined as the phantom appear in Greek tragedy.
Yeah.
But I think Asian might have used ghosts in comedy rather than in tragedy, and I think making fun of ghosts and ghost is much more, I think, familiar in our daily life than the Greek. But I cannot be sure because I did not live in the time of the Greeks. So yeah, I think if you ask about how we can use this artwork, I think it's effort. And I think the tension that you describe, we use the word calibration, isn't it? You come with the idea very quickly, but it takes so much time in calibrating the right measure of obviousness or vagueness, the right measure of appearance and the right measure of disappearance. And that I think is most valuable effort in your experience, I hope. But also I think for us, it should be the most important thing, the process of spending efforts in looking the whole space as being transformed by the strings of the bits, not just to look at the string of the bits, but look at the whole space being transformed into a reflective, meditative space. So that's why I frame it into the Asian tradition of gardening.
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on something you said, see, about seeing through the work. And it kind of makes perfect sense, because the way Eidolon is that you see right through it, certainly at a lot of angles, and suddenly it can become dense. But basically you're seeing through it literally.
Yeah. And back
But
to
also,
the walls, the white walls that
yeah, exactly,
you were obsessed with at the start of the...
Yeah, but you're also seeing through the eyes of Eidolon, in the sense of its help perhaps facilitating or catalyzing a way in which you can see through its terms, its spatial terms. So I think you mentioned yesterday, Marco, that there's no diagonal in classical architecture. So in a way, it just introduces this quiet spatial terminology into a space that doesn't have that, and has never had it, because it's part of an architectural tradition that does not have the diagonal in it. And actually, it's not something we really discussed when we were thinking about Eidolon, but it was when you mentioned that we thought, yes, of course, that's why the diagonal image made perfect sense in that space.
I just wanted to add that it also, the diagonal plane, I suppose, what it does is that you can't help but, because you're seeing through, for the first time, I am actually paying attention to not just the white wall, but actually, the windows of the City Hall chamber. This only kind of very, historical chamber within the gallery that has been completely sort of conserved or preserved in many ways, even during the renovation of the two kind of monuments into the current modern museum that we are in. And you can't help but to look straight into that past, even though it is a veil that is trying to quite, gently or
so it
subtly
conceals
covering it.
and
Yeah.
reveals it at
Yeah.
the same time.
Yes.
It's doing neither, but it's also kind of doing both.
Yeah, I suppose. And with all the friendly ghosts around, well, and the tragedy, well, we have the upcoming general election, so maybe that might add to another layer of contemplation along with our visitors. I'd like to open the floor now, perhaps, to some responses, some reflections or questions, if you have, of the things that have already been said or things that have not yet been said. So if you just raise your hand, one of our colleagues will come and pass you a microphone.
Can everyone hear me okay? Thank you, Vong and Claire, for your insightful sharing, and Marco, for your very interesting response, which I think in a way really prompt us to think about this installation in a wider kind of context of Singapore as well as Southeast Asia. I want to kind of redirect this kind of back to the artist, because I think what you share about your previous project, particularly Bay Window, it just resonates me so emotionally. I think a lot of your projects speak a lot about the kind of the forget, the dreams and hope that we forget about. And I'm wondering, during your kind of developing this project, be it kind of site racking or researching about Singapore, what kind of stories and hope have you encountered that kind of continue to linger with you? Perhaps not like a hope, not like a ghost, but giving you some sense of hope.
Well, I think on a human level, I'll get rather emotional now. On a human level, it's absolutely true to say that the team that's built up around this project has been absolutely exceptional for us. I mean, I really mean that. It's not sort of the thing you trot out at every project, but it's been a meeting of minds with Z, and so many really deep conversations, and you came to London and came to the studio and continued that. I think so. I would say, for me, and Vong may have something completely different, I would say that the people we've met in Singapore and the friendships we've made and the kind of artistic friendships that we've made through developing the work gives me great hope, because not all contexts that we work in flow in the same way. But that is what we have had in this context. And it's something really very powerful and very special. So that's a very general response, and doesn't really say much perhaps about Singapore as a city, but on a human level, that's my honest answer. What about you, Vong?
Well, I feel the sense of possibilities. Coming from the UK and having lived in the UK for nearly 50 years now.
40 years.
40 years. There's been a lot of high and low moments. And also the way you see how the art scene progresses. Sometimes doesn't go the way you expect it to do, My feeling about Singapore at the moment is that it's still searching. Searching, and it's very much like our position, constantly searching what is possible and what is not possible, except that the accent is on the positive side. In the UK, sometimes it could be very, negative, because somehow everything's been done, and then it's been taken as well, different fraction. So that it's always difficult to be part of it and to be slightly outside of it.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't allow you the opportunity to exist the way you want to be. It's so, it's so, so
divisive. Yeah.
Divisive.
Can be. Perhaps just to add on, I'm looking at Jennifer now, an example of that human kind of, what we've encountered in Singapore, and you, Marco, too, but that human connection. And going back to the ghosts, we had an incredible evening, thanks to Jennifer and Tien last night, who just reached out and said, we're going to take you around the Burke Brown Cemetery.
Of all the places
yes,
to go in
yeah.
Singapore.
So we had
Of
an
course, we hit
incredible,
the cemetery.
and we'd known you very briefly at the Biennale, and there we all were again, kind of joining up and having a really, really beautiful time. And that's memorable and it's meaningful. Yeah.
Didn't encounter any ghosts, though.
No, we didn't actually. No.
Last night we all sleep very well.
Okay.
Yes, we did.
We are not haunted.
Any other questions?
Yeah, thank you for very thought-provoking discussion. I would like to bring the questions or discussions maybe back to the transformation of space, right? With which we talked about the Coleman entrance, and one of the things that struck me when I saw your work when I came back from London was really a sense of the horror vacui, the kind of the fear of empty spaces, and fear. I think it's related to really the discussions that we've been having about ghosts, right? There's certain fear, and fear, I think it's also meaningful, and it's also productive. When we fear something, and also empty spaces. When we think about how do we deal with such a large space, and for me, the Coleman entrance is one of my most kind of fearful spaces. Whenever I step into the gallery, it's to do with a space with so many contradictions, because it's a space where visitors first come to the gallery. They buy tickets, they get information, they try to find their way around the gallery, they get lost and hopefully not encounter ghosts. But you know, and yet your work now transforms it, right? It's Marco, you use the term meditative, right, and taking effort, which runs counter to the current feeling of the space, which is where you get your ticket, you try to find out where you want to go, and then you leave, right? And so I hope you can say more about the transformation of the space with your work. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. That is what the work is about. Exactly that, and it's finding the visual language that does so many different things at the same time. So many paradoxical things, I suppose. Veiling, revealing, concealing, showing, saying nothing, being silent, but also being the catalyst for a lot of thoughts and ideas. And doing that all, in space. So I hope what Eidolon does is it introduces a kind of different economy to the space somehow, by just drawing this simple line diagonally across this neoclassical, very highly connoted space that contains so much history, so much future. Of course, it has the neoclassical architecture, which is also a ghost of the classical itself. And then you have this modern architecture by the French architects. So there are a lot of, forward and backward ghosting going on. So to find just something that can make an intervention that is both powerful and quiet at the same time.
I like Marco's remark about meditation and the connection with the garden. We are dealing with a small fragment of that classical, neoclassical legacy, and if the opposite example of the meditative garden that I can find is Château de Versailles, and its garden. It's there to impress you, to make you feel small, and it's to show off the wealth and the power. Somehow you can trace back all this element down to even this building. And therefore the work it's almost trying to recorrect that balance, just to make people a little bit more important, more it becomes more, approachable. And meditation, the work itself requires the viewer to be active, to move around. As soon as you stop, you may not see anything. But if you move by a few fractions, your eyes, then it reactivates again. Try to document the work with an automatic setting on your camera, and the lens will go mad, in and out. It doesn't know where to focus. And that's what we like about that. Because it also reminds me of the extract of the film in the walking meditative style. We tend to have this classical image of meditation, sitting down without moving, but walking is, it's an element that it's gone for a long time. Interesting enough, at the Apple Center, every time when the CEO of Apple Center always apparently likes having meeting by walking around and taking decisions.
Mm-hmm. And the English word to haunt a space, it also means to go back and go back again, a haunt. So it's kind of taken on that that other meaning.
Thank you for introducing the meditation.
I want to maybe return to one aspect that perhaps was not discussed here. And in order to, like, we've been talking a lot about visually, it is a very elusive artwork, right? It appears and then it disappears in your sort of like line of sight or your perception. But to achieve this really quite like large scale monumental work that is constantly kind of appearing and receding, there is also a lot of technical, I suppose, like precision that is required. And I suppose I would like to maybe ask you to share a bit about that process behind the scene of deciding how, for instance, the beads are arranged in such a way that within a space that is so cavernous, you are looking at a work that actually creates this optical interference, you know, the moire effect, right? Where everything that we have just described, the part that it shows up and then it changes, it creates this kind of interesting electrical, almost like buzz when you're trying to look at something but you can't see through. What was that process like? Because it's not like you were based in Singapore and you could sort of like, you know, come into the site and do a lot of tests, but like, is this process quite usual and typical to, you know, the other works? What sort of tests did you run? How did you come up with that interval between the beats, for instance, knowing that you can trust that the work will do its work in a way, you know?
Well, the tests that we did were on a very small scale. We just had a few lines of beads and walk around. It's very basic in that sense. And at one point we even put it in the garden far away to see how it may affect, you know, your eyesight and how you respond to the.
I think as we started off, didn't we, with some kind of mock-up images that Savan produced with us in the studio, and that was more illustrative in terms of it was done on Photoshop, and we were discussing how we projected the image to look. So that was almost like a fake, you know, it was that this is how we want it to look. And then we worked with a young architect who was able to actually do, you know, 3D maquette work and CAD drawings. And there was a lot of complexity there because he couldn't actually import that. If he imported all the beads, it just crashed. The whole software just crashed. So we then had to import them as lines, and then we had to think about, well, what we're seeing now, is that correct? Because actually they're not lines, they're beads. So, but we did do accurate CAD model with all of the lines present, but they weren't beaded. So we always had that slight vacillation, thinking, ooh, you know, I hope the lines are sufficient to actually visually test what the work will look like. So it's quite a complex process, and it involves CAD and the Photoshop work, and, as Vong said, the actual physical sort of looking at the beads, looking at how reflective they are, putting them far away, walking around them, and all those sort of things, and then hand sketches as well. So there's kind of lots of different elements to that.
And I know you don't want, or you don't think about how the work sits within maybe a longer kind of art historical, or even a sort of like, you know, lineage of speaking to the other sort of, you know, works or artists of the past. But I can't help but to see kind of references also between someone like Richard Serra with the sort of the heft of the gravity of the material sort of intervening in a particular space. And yet it is very, antithetical to a Richard Serra sort of bold move. So, to think of like how the veil actually is porous and completely sort of lightweight compared to a Serra's like hunk of like metal sheet obstructing the passageway in the middle of a circulation space. But I also see references of, for instance, Gordon Matter Clark, of a sort of taking away in order to reveal the space. In many sense, you also do the opposite in adding to the space in order for us to look at the space, right? So this last question maybe is for the both of you, both Marco and Vong and Claire. Do you sort of look at this work more in terms of a work of art, or is it an architectural intervention?
I think definitely art, on the side of art, but I'm really glad you brought up the kind of heavy metal boys, we call them. And some of them are fantastic sculptors, of course. But I think we've recently been talking a lot in the studio about the actually quite inappropriate nature of that type of work right now, particularly environmentally and so on. And the idea of working in huge chunks of steel that need to be shipped across the world, and it just does not feel at all kind of right at the moment, and I think we don't want to work in that way anymore at all. So finding new languages, new materials, and another thing we're doing a lot at the moment is simply drawing in the studio really simply, literally with the lightest touch possible, almost invisible drawings, by the way. And it's that part of that sense in which I think we want the practice to have a light touch right now. That it's not appropriate to be, I feel the same way about architecture really as well, in many ways, that it shouldn't be kind of massive, great chunks intervening in the landscape. So I'm glad you brought that up. I don't know if you've got any thoughts about that.
Well, definitely an artwork, because architecture deals with people using it, living in it, or pass. So it's you may come across similar question at one point, but it's un faux semblant.
It's a very different set of, you will know, challenges an architect has to face, and a much more complex one in many ways.
That's about it.
I think Z is not trying to divide us artists and architects, but I think your works, of course they are artworks, has become an architectural method to transform the space. So in that sense, you can say that their artworks have become an important architectural intervention. And now I think I would like to challenge the gallery. Now that the space has been transformed, maybe the next transformation that you want to expect is to transform your programming, your use of the space, your layout of the shops over there, your vending machine, and the position of the guards, and the position of the panels and information panel, etc. It would be interesting, isn't it, to now to see your turn to react to the space that you have asked them to transform. Now, how is it possible for you now to to react to this space that has been transformed. I think that is quite a challenge. And I think the second point is I started to think about their work as a method to see the city, to see architecture. So that's why I mentioned earlier, if you know, after you reading Orhan Pamuk and then you go out, see the city, you feel very different. You will see ghosts everywhere. And so the literature work of Orhan Pamuk has been a method of looking into the cities. And I think it is also possible to learn from your work and to use it as a method. So if you go out from here after looking at their work, try to imagine the layers in every space, in Padang, in other building, on the street, of the different layers possible, of the different perspectives. As you mentioned that meditation is not just sitting, it's Zen meditation is sitting, but the Mahayana Buddhist knows the so-called walking meditation that was actually facilitated strongly in the Borobudur. You walk around it while meditating. It's called walking meditation. They said it's the hardest thing to do. So meditate when you walk in the cities. I think that would be a very challenging work in, you know, vis-a-vis the modern life, full of objects, full of encounters, full of illusions, and you have to walk through your life in this. Try to get enlightened. I'm sorry I'm becoming so Buddhist because I cannot get rid of these Buddhist ideas about enlightenment, about meditation because of the garden idea in our tradition. I mean, I'm looking at Buddhism as we inherited, as traditions, you know, practice traditions.
Yeah, perhaps I guess we will have many visitors after this, you know, circumambulating the different levels from level 1 all the way to level 4, because I don't want to, like, there's a spoiler alert that the work does have a significant shift. If you come around the corners and you look straight at it, it no longer becomes a veil or a screen, but rather it is this precise two straight lines. So you're looking through in a different direction. So it now becomes a drawing as well. And then when you turn around again, the corner, you see the veil again. And so every sort of direction or angle that you are in relation to the work changes that visual perception of that work as well. If there are no other questions, I'll just kind of like pause around to see if there are any hands lifted. If there are no other questions, I would like to maybe end it here, and maybe just end it here with this invitation by Marco, Vong, by Claire, to look at everything but also the space anew. Do you have any final words before we end the session, the artists? Yeah.
Yeah, no, we really just want to say thank you to NGS and to Eugene and Patrick for having kind of confidence in and, you know, seeing the piece as something that they wanted to commission, and to Marco for coming today, and to our team, Savan, and all the other people who've helped us in the studio, and of course to Z, who has been absolutely above and beyond the most brilliant curator that we've worked with. And Yensi, we have to mention Yensi, the engineer, the NGS engineer, and her team, because she really, really committed to this. And it may not be fully understood because a single straight line across a space could not be more simple, could it? And yet, if it's a neoclassical colonial space that actually is not symmetrical at all, it may appear so, but it's not. She committed to getting that line straight across that space to exactly where we wanted it to land, either end. And if she hadn't done those figures so thoroughly and over so many months, the line would have not reached the opposite corner. It would have gone somewhere completely different. So we have to really kind of note that she is also, she and her team played an incredible role. So I'm sure I've missed out lots of people because it did take a village. So thank you.
Thank you again, Marco, Claire, Vong, and all of you actually who've stayed on this afternoon. Just before we leave, I'd like to again remind you and urge you to go to our UOB Theatre, which is located in the former Supreme Court wing, level 5, and catch the 2 films. All That's Solid, Melts into Air, Karl Marx, as well as Never Real Historians, Almost Near Poets, which will be on screen and on loop every 80 minutes. And the last day to catch it is tomorrow. So it's a very special screening that is sort of conceived to coincide with the launch of Eidolon. And I also would like to invite all of you to find your most favorite position or location in viewing the artwork and try and photograph it and see what comes out of it. Well, tag us and we might actually start posting some of the better ones. But I've been trying for the last week and it has not really been very successful. So I thank all of you for your attendance and your attention. Thank you. Have a lovely Sunday.